Welcome back, listeners, to the podcast of Three Men for Thee in the realms of politics, prophecy, and the supernatural. If you did not listen to our previous podcast, go back and look us up because we interviewed this little movie actor. His name is Kevin Sorbo. So
Oh,
I
I like Kevin.
think so I think you'll want to listen to the enlightened words that Kevin had to say in our conversations with him. But we are just thrilled today to have with us Mark Victor Hansen. And if you do any research on him, you know he's one of the top speakers on leadership in the world. And he's written a little book that has something to do with soup. I think it's called Chicken Soup for the Soul. And Mark, I apologize I didn't have any soup for lunch today, but uh, I've read some of your books, and I'm halfway through Ask right now. And I read the Relentless book. Yes, Ask. We'll post that on our video so our listeners will have a chance to log into your website to see the books that you've done. So, what we normally do is have a series of questions and just good old conversations, and we'll rotate around. And we'll just start off with Jack.
Good. Welcome, Mark. We are very, very honored and pleased to have you. Thank you for your time. I'd like to start the way that I always like to start, which is Christ is the center point of my life. I trust it is for you. I have amazed at how God reaches out to everyone, and I mean everyone. I believe everyone gets a shot. But I'd like to know, how is it that you came to know Jesus Christ?
Wow. I've done lots of interviews, never got that. That is a great question. First of all, Crystal and I just got done praying and meditating for an hour, and we also
Oh,
listened to enchanted music that elevates consciousness and soul in a company that we own called Newcom, a rescue program, which is really amazing stuff. Wow. As a little kid, obviously, my parents took me to church, and for me, it was sort of perfunctory. When I went bankrupt, I go to two church services back, this is 50 years ago, 1974, and we went to see my friend Norman Vincent Peale, the guy who wrote Power Positive Thinking in the morning. And then that afternoon, we went up to Washington Heights and heard a guy named Reverend Ike. And it just, that started my trajectory of two church services every Sunday, which has never stopped. So for 50 years, I've been there. We also, I got so enthralled. We obviously did Chicken Soup for the Christian soul, which sold gazillions. And then my publisher said, "Well, you'll never sell the Bible." So I said, "Well, let me go to Thomas Nelson." We sold Chicken Soup of the Soul Bible. We sold 70,000 a week at Walmart because I did. I said, look, I don't know everything, but as a marketing business entrepreneurial author who is a pretty good writer, sold a 500,000 books, so I've done okay. I said, let me do a little story that gets me into the big story, and let's get rid of the black cover and the gold foil and the silver leaf and not scare the crap out of people because some of them have been thrust the Bible at them. So we sold a lot of them, and we did a tan inside and a little story getting the big story, and it really worked, and it's still working and still selling. And now somebody out there is going to say, well, you're trying to hustle books. So I buy them and give them to my friends still, but you can buy them at thrift books for $3, and these cost 30 originally. So I am not getting paid anything at thrift books. So I just want everyone to have a Bible in their house, and forgive me for saying the next thing, but when I grew up, you got Bibles when you went to the Lutheran or Baptist church, and then all the churches I've been to ever since, Joel, anyone, T.D. Jakes. I've talked at every one of the big evangelistic churches, I think, in America, at least once. And most of the time they have me back. So I just, not everybody has a Bible, and I think everybody should, and they need to read it each and every day, all the days of your life, because it is profound and it takes a while to catch on to. There's four levels to any book, but the most important is, let me just do this. We just had dinner with Dr. Jordan Peterson, who went from atheism to Christianity, and he now lives here in Scottsdale, and we fortuitously met him, and I won't go through that, but I said, you're the only guy that I've ever seen. I do an exegesis on a story, and that means take the story and what does it mean to you at a higher, better. But he does the whole Bible, Old Testament in one, in an exegesis. And his wife was astounded that I knew what he was talking about. And I said, yeah, no, I'm pretty good at Bible. I hope I didn't over answer your question.
No.
Oh, no, that's fine. Thank you, sir. Go ahead, Carl.
All right, Mark, what makes you a Christian?
Well, it's not going to church, temple, synagogue, ashram, mosque, or wherever you go to get your spiritual fill up. And for us, that's church. What makes you a Christian is when you understand the principles, impregnate yourself so deeply, profoundly that you live the principle. And I even wrote a little book called The Miracle of Tithing, which you can tell who is and isn't, because when they see that title, and we saw a gazillion of those too, but they say, "What's a miracle of tithing?" And I said, "My friend, you have not been tithed enough lately." Tithing, for those of you who are watching the first time, I don't know, means give a tithe back. And look, my friend Dr. Ben Carson always says is that, look, God's just proportional, but it's proportional to everybody give 10% back. And when you give 10% back, last chapter of the Old Testament, Malachi, you open up the windows of heaven and you're a rich reward. The reason I sell more books than anyone in the world in nonfiction, according to Guinness Book of Records, is that I tithe in every book. By the way, it's not obligatory. Here, let me explain it, because one time I'm at the Maui Writers Conference with a guy who wrote The 1 Minute Millionaire with Bob Allen, and we're walking on the beach at like 6 a.m. preparing for our talk. And he said, and he is a big giver and very generous. And he said, "Take me through what it is." I said, "Well, it's like water. It comes in three forms. Water is frozen. It doesn't move. When you don't tithe, they don't move. When you just give a little, well, I'm going to give 1%. I'm going to go give $1 to the Salvation Army because it's Christmas time and the guy's ringing the bell. That's like an airplane hits the ocean, it breaks up. It's solid stuff. But when you tithe your 10%, and then you can go beyond that, of course, double tithe, triple tithe, a lot of people do 90%, give 90%, and they keep getting inundated with stuff. But when you tithe, it makes it like moisture, one drop of water. And when it steams up your bathroom, if the door's closed, the whole place steams up. The mirror, you got to wipe it off to see yourself. That's what tithing does. It opens up all the channels.
So at some point, you recognized you were a sinner in need of the Savior?
My read says that doesn't stop.
We always need it, yes.
All right. Now, I know that you're like the rest of us. You've had your ups and downs. So where did you learn the most? With your ups or with your downs? With your successes or your failures?
I think that goes to the last chapter of Genesis, where the guy's gone through every torture that could exist, I suspect. We're talking about Joseph in many-colored coat, and then his brothers show up and they're starving to death. And luckily he'd read the prophecy right and said, "Look, we're going to save, not tithe, double tithe." They did 20% saving, so he had enough food to control the world. And he was the second in command to the commander of Egypt at the time, the Pharaoh. And he said, "Look, to his brothers, right? What you meant for my harm, God meant for my good." Every one of us has got that. And what you can't see is, I was talking to Joel Osteen the other day. They shoot him up at his church. The kid got shot by the mother who came in with a gun. Mind blower of a story. It's worthy of 15 minutes, but that'll eat up all our time. But the kid was dead got shot by the mother who was just trying to get into special needs, or a kid with special needs. Goes to the hospital, is on life support for 2 weeks. The grandmother said, "Look, because she did this horrific thing at Joel Osteen's church, what we'll do is we'll give all the kids' body parts away." They unplug the kid, and for the first time, the kid talks. And, stories like that are so good, you can't make them up. And I'm in the story business lifelong. And I would suggest to you, I'm answering the question from an exegesis point of view. The Bible is a book of stories. And once you understand the stories, and Jesus called them parables, and a parable is a two-story story. It's what does the story say literally? I hope I pronounced that right. But what does it mean to me? The story in the story has it has an esoteric, but it has a bigger exoteric meaning of how is that supposed to affect my life? Did that answer your question?
Somewhat, yeah. In other words, you learned both from your successes and your failures. All right,
Right.
Herb, you're online.
Mark, I don't know how to say this, but I think I mentioned this to Jack earlier after reading some of your history. I think we must have some twin brain cells. And I'm going to tell you why. Number one, you've already begun to answer one of the questions I was going to ask you, and you didn't know I was going to ask you that. Uh, Number two is, wow, we kind of did the same thing grade-wise in college for a little bit. And number three is, man, when I was a young boy, I loved cherry bombs.
Oh, I know that story.
Oh yeah, my cousin and I, we used to blow up all of our toys with our cherry bombs.
I know that game.
Yeah. So,
Well, let's talk about the twin brain cells. I can do an exegesis and everything you said, but just do that. I think we've come into the most spiritual time in human history. We've seen for the last decade or a little longer all the worst stuff that can happen, the anti stuff, the people that hate God because they hate themselves because they don't know God, because they got a hole in their soul, right? And it leads to addiction. It leads to people trying to commit genocide, which we can talk to if you want. But let me do the opposite. I prayed about what I had to share, and there's two things. One is there's a movie that I hope you guys like, and that is called The Chosen, which shows what Jesus' life was really like, not just perfunctorily, like here's what he said, but here's the problems the guy had with everybody. And then the other one that just came out, that again, I didn't know this until last week. Joel Osteen paid for the movie called Mary, which is on Netflix, and nothing has happened like this. Netflix has never had a movie in 1 week have 250 million views about the story of the Virgin Mary, which I'm saying that your brain cell, my brain cell, the boys here brain cell, but more importantly, the people watching this, the brain cells of humanity are waking up now.
yes.
You and I may not like the terminology that I do next, but we got 5 kids, 6 grandkids, but one of my kids graduated school as an evolutionary biologist. All that means is a little girl walks at 9 months, a little boys walk at 12 months, right? And written language didn't start until 5,000 or 6,000 years ago when Moses could start creating all this stuff. And then the printing press amplified it. But somehow God set it up to do that. And right now, I think back to the most important thing I can say about what you said about brain cells, because I own a publishing company, Mark Victor Hansen Library, because other publishers are going down. I decided, no, books and books are seeds, right? Seed thought. And a lot of my books, like Ask, is totally Christian based, but and that's why it sells so well in churches and everywhere. But the point is, I think a lot of brain cells are waking up to the fact that, hey, wait a second, I got a spiritual void in me, and I better start taking on spiritual nutrition. That's why I said the two movies are mind-blowingly changing a lot of minds.
Yeah. Well, I gotta go back. One more question.
Sure.
About the twin brain cells. I see behind you the book called Ask.
Yeah.
Guess what? One of my books is called Never Stop Asking, Discovering, and Sharing. So how about that?
The big language is verisimilitude. That means there's a lot of like there.
Yes, yeah. Go ahead, Jack.
Well, as a very prolific author, what is the genesis behind Chicken Soup for the Soul? I saw that book many years ago, when I became enthralled with it, and you've taken it and you've gone in so many different directions with it. One topic and this topic and that. Explain, how was that something you felt that the Lord put on you? How did all that get going?
Yeah. Well, the line that Jesus says, pray as though the thing for which you're praying has been received, and ye shall have it. So I didn't tell people, but I journal every day and write down all the stuff I want, right? And I was clear that I wanted to become world's best-selling author. Pretty pompous, pretty pretentious, but God says pray bold prayers. I mean, starting with Solomon and all that stuff. And he was worth $4 trillion, 16 tons of gold, it says in Kings. Anyhow, so we're brought to him by one guy. So the guy was pretty substantial. So I said I wanted to do this. I was writing stories and doing well. Jack Canfield, third in his class at Harvard, and I were on the same program. He came up to me afterwards and said, "Do you know me?" I said, "Yeah, I do. You sold 370,000 copies of How to Build Self-Esteem in Classroom, humma, humma." Long story short, he said, "Man, I've never seen anyone sell stuff like you do from a platform. Can we meet?" And then I taught him, and he had a medical doctor wife. And I taught him how to set his goals because, without vision, people perish, Solomon taught us. Flip that and say, with vision, we flourish. So I said, Jack, you're teaching in schools and educators need this. Unfortunately, thank God we're going to change the whole educational system right now. But I said, you got to put your goals on your ceiling, on your mirror, and all these places. And his wife said, you don't really believe all that crap Mark's saying, I hope. Anyhow, well, he went from making $100,000 a year, 10-folding, which I teach, because Christ said 30, 60, or 100-fold. And that's pretty good. And all plants do that. Apples have a lot of seeds. Watermelon has a lot of seeds. Caterpillars become butterflies. That's transformation. And so Jack started making a lot of money. And then he said, well, here, I typed up these stories of yours and I want to do a book. I said, well, Jack, you can't do it without me. I said, they've got a copyright on there and I trademark everything. And I'm a hardcore businessman that's pretty successful. So he said, we'll do it together. And, he had 144 publishers all jokingly said, hit the road, Jack. They, remember, I told you, I wrote a wow of a business plan. I'd interviewed the 101 best-selling fiction and nonfiction authors, and I wrote down everything they did. I didn't ask them how to write a book. I know how to write, obviously. So I said, tell me how you marketed more books than anyone, James Patterson or Nora Roberts or anybody. And they did. And James Michener said, man, nobody's ever asked me that. Everybody asked me dumb questions about how to write. And heck, you shouldn't try to be a writer if you can't write. You had to have some validation. Mom liked it. Somebody liked it. And I said, that's right. But I wrote down what they did. And then dumb me, I wrote, I will sell 1 billion books. And I'm halfway to goal. But remember, Genesis 6:3 says you shall live 120 years. And if you go a little deep, Moses, his eye was not weak, nor his breath bated, nor any guile found in his mouth, means that the boy was in good health, right? He had 40, right? Sure, he killed somebody early on, but he was just trying to defend the flock that he thought he found out he was Jewish. That's how I read it. Now, if you guys read it different, you're allowed to say, I don't think you read that right or understand it right. And I'm okay with that. You can hold up a reflective mirror because I teach feedback to breakfast champions. But the point is, if he did it and you're in high quality health, you want a high quantity health. So I've got both. I'm 77 and I got 50 years to go. And I can guarantee you my grandkids, one of whom is having a birthday today, are in and we're taking them to the Museum of the Bible here. And when they get out of school in June, we've already scheduled it. So we believe they need to know the stuff that my wife and I know. Again, I might be over answering you guys' questions.
I know that I'm older than you now.
How old are you?
76.
I'm 77. How are you older than me?
Oh. It's because I can't remember things.
Herb's a man of words, not a man of numbers.
Well, by the way, I did the book with Art Linkletter and he narrated the whole Bible and did a really good job. But I wrote it with him when he was 96. And the only reason he died at 98 is not health. His wife predeceased him after 72 years and he could not stand being alone.
Wow.
He called up Crystal and said, I want you to bring your whole family up here to Bel Air. And we did, and we had a wonderful day. But he said, I can't be alone. And I said, well, I can't have you live with me. You're not my relative, but I just don't think it's right. I know you love us, but it just isn't right. So it's going to happen.
Carl.
So what is your key to success, Mark, in your opinion? What is the real inside scoop that makes you successful?
I think the first thing I've taught for all these years at all the seminars around the world, 7 million people, was you got to figure out what you want. Most people don't know what they want. And that's why when we bond people in a one-on-one, say 50 times a row, what do you want? And the first, I want a new car, I want a new house, I want to pay off the insurance, I want to pay off my school debt, all that junk. But by the time you hit 50, you're real clear. And obviously you should be debt-free and all those kind of things and have your, but once you really know, you figure out that what you want is freedom, and you want 4 levels. You want money freedom, whatever that means to you. So you can buy your financial freedom buys your time freedom. And then once you got your time freedom, what do you want in relationship? Because most of us are only going to have a few really deep, close friendships during a lifetime. And the guy I studied long ago in Asia with is still our closest friend, and we travel and talk a couple times a week, and he's a genius. Anyhow, and then the fourth thing is you get passionately on purpose about something. That's a freedom, but you can only do it if you got finances. Like I'm passionately purposeful about a lot of things, but I have enough money that I can do almost anything I want. And we got our publishing house is doing, like we're doing a biography of John Paul DeJoria, who was homeless twice, now worth $8 billion, called Success Without Sharing is Failure. He's the best tither I know. He goes down to the island. He's down in the Caribbean at Barbuda, and a hurricane wiped it out, no employment, nothing. So he said, well, somebody's got to fix this, and I don't have any education, but I'll figure it out. He hires the top fish doctor, ichthyologist in the world. They made it hurricane proof. They brought back the fish, they brought back the turtle, they brought back the life, 100% employment. Everybody in the Caribbean's coming there, and he's turned around the whole Caribbean, so there's no more hurricanes, which is, the hurricanes can't damage an island. And what it is what God gave us is the most miraculous, imaginative, I'm way over answering your question, but imaginative, intuitive faculty that doesn't exist for anyone. John Paul and I have been friends for 30 years. We're both Horatio Alger Award winners for Distinguished American, but he feeds 40,000 people every night in his hometown of Austin, Texas, but he tests them. This is where everybody else screws up. He tests them, and half of them, he gets them back to work the next day because he finds out what they're competent at doing, what they want to do, what they're competent at doing, what they can do, and then he gets them back to work. And we need to do that to all of America because we can't have anyone, and now I'm going to be an ageist with my kid friend here, Herb. Nobody gets to retire. There's nowhere in the Bible that says, now right. 52, 65, 72, or a multimillionaire, go down and retire. If you can find that in the Bible, I want to have you show it to me because it doesn't. You're supposed to, if Genesis 1:28 is true, it says God, we're created in the image and likeness of God. God works 7 days a week. Now he does take off 1 day a week. We got that, but you're supposed to do 3 C's: create, contribute, and then be 10% charitable. Those seem like pretty simple rules to me, and I love following them. They all I can tell you is that I've got replete, happy, abundance, health, joy, success, prosperity, cash flow, free time. We take ourselves wherever we want to go, but our grandkids are going to know what the whole world is, and all of them have to work. They don't get a free lunch. They're not getting any free lunches.
So what do we need to pray for you?
I know.
Audience, what do they need to be praying for you?
Okay, so I got 10 macro goals. One is make the world work for 100% of humanity. That's up to each of us. That's not up to Mark. I'll show you the path in some of my books and that, because I really believe we can make the world 100% economically, physically, and spiritually successful for the first time in history. Christ said it in John 10:10, I've come that you might have life and have more abundantly. But right before that, he said, you got to watch it. The thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And I've had plenty of people try to do that for me. So I'm crystal clear. There are a lot of bad guys out there. But most people go, I can just be the happy camper. No, you can be a happy camper, but you got to be dang smart and have all your assets covered. Like all those, it hurts my heart that like John Paul had one of his houses just burned to the ground in Malibu, along with 60 square miles of Malibu. That was not an accidental fire. That was a bad leadership.
Yeah.
Amen to
Well,
that.
you talked about we never retire. Christ never asked the disciples to retire. He sent them on a mission for the rest of their life. So there was a time in your life where, if I understand correctly, you had a pretty big failure and you spoke to somebody and that person spoke back to you and gave you some advice. Could you share that with our listeners?
Yeah, it's 1974, and I thought a gigantic business, $2 million a year. For me, remember, I came out of no money, so my parents didn't have anything. I've worked since I was 9 years old, bought my own clothes. So I am so low, I got to reach up to touch bottom, and as they say, and went bankrupt for $2 million in one day because Monsanto, which is a company I still dislike, because of Roundup, I think it's a dangerous product. But back then they were selling me $40,000 a month of PVC plastic, and the oil embargo hit, and which was all a bunch of junk. We aren't short of oil then. We're not short of oil now. This is political garbage. If anyone tells you, we got somebody now that's saying we got a lot of gold and oil under the ground. We do in Texas and Oklahoma and Alaska and Wyoming. We got oil forever and ever. And I live in a state we're in a desert and we get enough water for the next 1,000 years because I'm part of that deal too. So, right, I'll make the deserts bloom, the Bible says. So, but I didn't know that. When I went bankrupt, I thought I wanted to kill myself because I thought my net worth and my self-worth were the same. No, ladies and gentlemen, if you're having a financial thing and you're hanging on by your fingernails, I think what Herb's asked me to do is talk to that. And they're not the same. Your self-worth is how do you feel about yourself and how do you feel about God in you creating great stuff. And if you wake up to the godliness, the Spirit of God in each and every one of us has infinite, inexhaustible, unlimited opportunities. As a matter of fact, once you get going, it'll be just the opposite. You got to say no to some of the stuff that's like, we're standing in a spot where all the good things pour out. And once in a while, like I got something on my desk right now that's so cool that I can't even start to believe it. And I got to tell the guy, I apologize. We just don't have bandwidth to do this with you. Although the project's great, you're great, and it needs to be done, but it can't come under my leadership because my leadership is bandwidth is pretty full. Did that make sense?
Yeah. So
it was a long 360 degrees to get back to your question.
So like you, I was failing at something and I got so pissed off. I slammed my hands on the desk and I prayed, God, I got to quit praying. What can you do for me? I got to pray, God, what can I do for you? And the message I got back was to use your talents to spread my word. I'd never read the Bible, so that was my first journey through the Bible. And that led me to be an author, which I never thought I'd ever be. It wasn't on my radar. So we have to pursue. Go ahead.
Yeah, now I know what you were asking for, and I may not answer it right. So when I was praying, I'm bankrupt, I'm upside down, I'm sleeping on a sleeping bag in front of another guy's bedroom for $100 a month in Hicksville, Long Island, New York. So I was not styling and profiling anymore. Everything, bankruptcy courts of the old days took everything from you. So and I had to check I checked a book out of the biggest library in the world, New York Public Library, How to Go Bankrupt by Yourself. So some of you are in there right now suffering. So I am not making fun. I'm making fun of myself and my history. So I said, okay, God, what do you want me to do? Same question you asked just now. And God doesn't do it that way. He said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to speak to people that care about things that matter, that make a life-changing difference. Luckily, I went down, I had 3 roommates, we were having breakfast. And I said, any of you guys know somebody that's not white hair, a cotton top, somebody that's not a Broadway star, because we were in New York, or a celebrity or a lawyer or a doctor that's talking? And the guy said, oh, he's 10 years older than you, Chip Collins. He's out here in Hauppauge, Long Island, New York. I got in my little beat up Volkswagen I had to wipe the snow off with my hand. That didn't work. The heater didn't work. Rush out there. Listen to this guy just wow the audience. Say, teach me how to do what you do. Long story short, he said, I'll do it, but you do the life insurance business. I own the real estate. And he trained me, and he trained Barbara Corcoran, who's Miss Shark Tank. So he trained a lot of famous people, and he was really good, but and he was my mastermind partner, because here's the mastermind is what you got to have. So you got to figure out what you want, but then you got to have a team, a dream team. And what Andrew Carnegie, and I got all of his books, but Andy taught it to Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill, said, look, I got a team together because Jesus didn't do his first miracle, water into wine in Cana, until he had 12 disciples. So once I read Andy did that and became the richest man at his time, and if you really look at what Elon Musk did, who's now my current hero, he's done it. And you just go, wow. So I obviously got 12, I got a group of a dozen disciples or friends or partners or whatever you want to call it. But mastermind, you create a third new mind that's invincible. And I came back up pretty fast and paid all that debt back and all that. Yeah. Is that the answer you're looking for?
That's it. Your communication that way led to your action this way.
That's right. No, God will tell you, no, you tell me what you want to do, and I'm going to help you make it, because it's immutable stuff that you got to impress.
Yeah.
God got it all, so he can give you anything you want, but you got to be clear about what you want and make sure that it doesn't violate the rights of anyone else.
Well, Mark, can we continue the conversation a little bit longer?
Sure.
Okay. Well, listeners, we are about to conclude part 1 of our podcast. So this amazing conversation is going to go into 2 parts. And Mark, how about just the last word for part one to our listeners, and then we'll move into part two, and we'll share some information with them, links and those kinds of things. So, a parting word for part one, Mark.
Seeing as you love my book, Ask, the question is the size of your question determines the size of your result. So if you ask big question, you get bigger results. If you say, well, how do I make $10,000? You make 10. If you ask, how do I make $1 million a year? You can make $1 million a year as easy as you can make 10,000 or 100,000 or 50,000 or $250,000 or whatever. So the size of your question determines the size of your result. If you say, well, I just want to get married, that is a question, but not a good question. I wrote down my ideal wife would have to have 287 things. I thought, I'll never find her. And then I found Crystal, and she was 287 out of 287. Had a magnificent personality. Had to love me, love my business, want to travel, all kinds of cool stuff.
Okay, so listeners, just remember as we close out this part one, take this message with you. Ask, 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 and never stop. So we want you to come back to part two. We'll start back up here in just a moment, and be sure to tune in to part two.